Alright, today we're going to talk about the urinary system. So we are on page 62 in the lab packet. We are skipping over the respiratory and digestive system only because we tend to overlap with general A&P with those systems, and we don't have enough models to share between the classes. So we skip ahead to the urinary and the reproductive. Then we'll go back and do respiratory and digestive. So on page 62 of the packet are your objectives. Otherwise, with the new book, you'll see that that has a new page number, and I can't tell you what that is because we don't have the book made yet, but make sure you're looking at the urinary system lab notes. So we have a pair of kidneys that make up the main organ of the urinary system, and there's a pair of those. They're not very large, as you can see here, and they are on the back wall of the abdominal cavity, actually behind the true peritoneal cavity, so it's called retroperitoneal, meaning behind the perineal cavity, up against the back wall. And they are not very well protected. You can see the ribs provide a little bit of protection, but not very much, so they are prone to damage when someone is in a car accident or playing football, for example. There's special pads that go up over this region to protect the kidneys. And the job of the kidneys is to filter blood that comes in via the renal artery, and that filtered blood, the plasma comes out of the blood through the capillaries in the kidneys, and that filtered plasma eventually leaves the kidney via the ureters. So there's a pair of ureters that drain each kidney. So here's the left and right kidney. We can see the left kidney is a little higher than the right kidney. But these ureters drain the urine produced by the kidney and take it down to the bladder for storage. So there's a pair of ureters that drain the blood from the kidney to the bladder. And smooth muscle contractions called peristalsis is what helps move the urine through the ureters to the bladder for storage. And the opening of the bladder to the outside of the body is called the urethra, and that's this structure right down here, the very end of the bladder, the opening to the outside. And obviously males have a longer urethra than females do, therefore females are more prone to urinary tract infections because of the shorter distance the bacteria have to travel from outside the body into the sterile urinary tract. So here's a model we use in lab that you'll see. You can see the pair of kidneys. We can see the ureters that are pinned here. This one is pinned, a pair of ureters leading to the bladder. And then we can see this urethra at the bottom here, the opening to the outside. And there's a muscle around it, a sphincter, that controls that. There's a sphincter at the very opening here close to the bladder, and there's another sphincter down here that we can control when it's convenient to urinate. The other structure, the yellow structure, we'll learn about when we get to the reproductive system of the male. Also looking at this diagram, we can see that there is the abdominal aorta and the inferior vena cava. So the vessel that comes off the abdominal aorta to feed the kidney, that is the renal artery. And the vessel that receives blood from the kidney would be the renal vein going back to the inferior vena cava. Here's a close-up view of the kidney. We can look at the details inside the kidney. Again, here's the renal vein. Here's the renal artery. This is the ureter. So if we look at the kidney, kind of working our way from the outside in, this lighter outer margin of the kidney here, we see the tiniest of capillaries here. This is called the cortex, the renal cortex. Whenever you're talking about the kidneys, we use the prefix renal. So the cortex is this lighter margin of the kidney. Then we have these darker triangular portions here. Well, together, this darker region in the medial aspect of the kidney, or toward the middle, a little deeper from the cortex, this is called the medulla. Together, all these triangular darker structures we call the medulla. Now we can be more specific and focus in on one region of the medulla and look at this triangular structure of the medulla. This is called a pyramid. Here is another pyramid. A triangular section of medulla is what we call a pyramid. So we can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pyramids in this particular kidney diagram. So the pyramids are the regions where urine is formed, and we'll zero in on a section of a pyramid in just a minute, but this narrowed end of the pyramid here, urine is formed down the pyramid to this narrowed end, this point of the triangle. This is called the apex. So here we see an apex. It's an apex here, here. All of these narrowed ends of the pyramid we call an apex. Another name for them is a papilla. So it's just the narrowed end of a pyramid, apex or papilla. Then we can see some regions of cortex that dip down between two pyramids. These are called renal columns, and they are kind of column shaped, so that makes sense. So this is a renal column, this is a renal column, just these areas between the pyramids where the renal cortex kind of dips down between the pyramids. Those are renal columns. And we can see there's blood vessels that run down those renal columns. So that provides blood supply, to the external parts, the lateral portions of the kidney, and then connecting it to the renal artery and vein. And then also, if we look here, we can see that the kidney is indented here in the center. Just like if you look at a kidney bean in a bowl of chili, you'll see the indented region of the kidney. That's called the hilum. And the hilum is where the ureter and the renal vein and renal artery enter and leave the kidney. So this is the hilum, this region here, this indented region where the vessels and the ureter come in and out of the kidney. And then we look more into detail here as far as how urine leaves the kidney. So we have this apex or papilla, and then that urine drains into these large vessels that drain each pyramid, and these are each called a calyx. So this is a calyx, this is a calyx, another calyx here. So together, more than one, we say calyces. So in this example, there's 7 calyces because there's 7 pyramids, and each one is drained by a calyx. And then each of those calyces leads into this general region near the hilum of the kidney where urine collects, and this is called the pelvis. So this common area that receives urine from each calyx we call the pelvis. And then that pelvis is drained by the ureter. So think of the calyces almost like rivers leading to a lake. The lake is the pelvis, and each river feeding into it would be a calyx. And then that leads, like I said, to the bladder via the ureters. So that's kind of the gross anatomy of the kidney. And then if we get down looking at the microscopic units of the kidney, out here in the cortex are these small circular structures which are called a renal corpuscle. And it's not shown in this diagram here, but we will show you, I do have a picture of one in Dropbox that you can look at. But out in the cortex are these rounded spherical structures. This one has been cut in half, so we can't see the other side of this rounded structure. But picture that completely encasing this little tuft of capillaries that we find out in the cortex. And these are just basically the final branches of the renal artery, bringing oxygenated blood, but blood that needs to be filtered, into the kidney, into the cortex. So together, this structure on the outside is called the Bowman's capsule. You can see it has a capsule appearance to it, and then the tuft of capillaries inside of it is called the glomerulus. So this is the glomerulus. This is Bowman's capsule that surrounds the glomerulus. Think of it almost like the Bowman's capsule as a baseball mitt, with the ball being the glomerulus inside of it. So it completely wraps around it. And as plasma is squeezed out of these capillaries through the holes in the glomerulus, that fluid enters Bowman's capsule and starts to drain through a network of tubules that will eventually form urine. So this together, the Bowman's capsule plus the glomerulus, we call the renal corpuscle. The renal corpuscle. And in your textbook, I'm just looking to see if there's a picture in your textbook. I'm not sure if they have one specifically showing the renal corpuscle, but I'll give you a page reference if I come across it. But we'll look at a picture in Dropbox that shows that. So we'll go to Dropbox. Urinary. I guess we don't have one in there yet. I need to add a photo. I will add a photo, and then I'll show you what those renal corpuscles look like in the cortex. Let's see if I can give you a page reference here. Yeah, unfortunately your textbook doesn't show it either, so we definitely need to put a picture of that on Dropbox, and I'll add that later and show you that. So moving on then, so we have the glomerulus with Bowman's capsule, and here we can see this would be the cortex, this region out here. So we can see the glomerulus, we can see the Bowman's capsule around it, and then it leads to this first tubule, which is called the proximal convoluted tubule. The term convoluted comes from the fact that it's kind of zigzaggy tubule, kind of going in all different directions. And then it straightens out and leads to this narrow, kind of thin U-shaped structure. This is called the loop of Henle. Loop of Henle is this thin U-shaped structure. And then it kind of zigzags back around again and travels toward this long tree branch looking structure. But this part at the end of the loop of Henle that starts to zigzag again, this we call the distal convoluted tubule. And if you recall from the beginning of the semester, we used the word proximal as a term for meaning close to, and distal was a term we used meaning further away from the point of attachment. So the proximal convoluted tubule is named because it's close to Bowman's capsule. It's attached to it, so it's proximal. The distal convoluted tubule is also kind of a zigzaggy looking tubule, but it's further down the piping system, so it's called the distal convoluted tubule. And if we follow it, we'll see it travels behind the glomerulus, comes up, down, and attaches here. And this structure attaches to several different distal convoluted tubules from different nephrons, which we'll talk about in a minute. But this is called the collecting duct. It kind of looks like a tree branch. It's a thicker tubule, and that's what is going to drain to the apex, to the calyx, to the pelvis, to the ureter, to the bladder, and out the body. So this is the collecting duct, and it has special connections for more than one distal convoluted tubule to connect to it. So we call this structure, starting with the Bowman's capsule, including the proximal convoluted tubule, including the loop of Henle, including the distal convoluted tubule, and ending here, we call this the nephron. So the nephron is a tubule that is composed of several different segments, each having its own name. And when we get to the lecture portion of the urinary system, we'll find that each section has specific functions in making urine. So that is the nephron. So we'll look at this model we have here. It's nice because it kind of color codes the different parts of the nephron. So the nephron starts here with Bowman's capsule, which is shown in blue here. And then it becomes the proximal convoluted tubule. And then it straightens out to form the loop of Henle. So this is the loop of Henle. And then it becomes the distal convoluted tubule up here. This is the distal convoluted tubule in dark green. And then it hooks up with a collecting duct, which is this long tree branch looking structure. So again, the nephron starts here with Bowman's capsule, and it ends with the distal convoluted tubule. Remember, this tuft of capillaries inside of Bowman's capsule is called the glomerulus. So be sure you label each of these structures on your PowerPoint notes, and also in Dropbox there are some pictures for you to look at that are pinned to help you practice for the lab practical. And that concludes our discussion of the urinary system.